So we're in the New York Times this weekend. The article was done by William Brennan, who traveled to the UK, spent, some 10 days here, and stayed in the clinic. I looked around, and it's interesting. When you've got something new and different that really needs more attention, and you get this attention from something like the New York Times, you're really going to hope that this gets the message out there. So I've not read this article in the New York Times, and I thought that it would be good if I were to read it live, so you could see, I could critique the article in real time, sort of what I was really thinking. So here we are, the New York Times article written by William Brennan, Billy. The title, it's a feature article. It's how two British orthodontists became celebrities to incels. Well, this incels, this is some sort of internet forum thing. I don't really know myself. Interesting title. And I know titles aren't chosen by the author. With the subtitle is The Muse, a father and son team of orthodontists, it's true, have an unusual theory about the source of crooked teeth. Possibly unusual to the general public, not to anyone who is scientifically minded. One that has earned them a following in some of the darker corners of the internet. Oh, and that's definitely true. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Nice picture of Dad. So John Mew is a 91-year-old orthodontist from the United Kingdom. His face is long and narrow. His hazel eyes rest in deep sockets. Atop his head wears a yellowing toupee. His present betrayed by a fringe of talc white hair poking out his eyes. Yet, in his youth, John navigated the British Isles as a competitive sailor. I didn't say he navigated the British Isles. I mean, he did some sailing. I mean, sailed in many places, mainly out of clubs on the sea, and clearly at Buell Valley, or a lake. He's raced Formula One cars and modelled period costumes for the BBC, a minor incident. He now walks a cane, and he's still vigorous. Yes, he's very vigorous sometimes, yes. Being his son isn't easy. He lives alone in a castle of his own making, which sits atop a man-made lake in a secluded forest in southeast England. Well, not really a forest, there's a few trees around it. When I met him last March, he ushered me across a reedy moat into the kitchen. Walking through his home, which he built in the 1990s, yes, we passed by a medieval drawing room with intentionally slanted walls and climbed a staircase to the turret, whose stone steps John Mew had sanded down unevenly in the hopes of lending them an appearance of age. True, more or less. In the dining room we call the Great Hall, the grotesques protruded from the oak beams near the ceiling, all of them carved by Mew himself. He points it out to me that the earliest carvings tended to have lopsided faces, while the later ones did not, as he refined his techniques on the fly, all part of the ambience, he told me. Why do crooked things look better? I don't know, they do. Anyway, but if crookedness lends a castle its beauty, it does the opposite to a face. And nothing concerns me more than the proliferation of ugly faces. Yeah, I mean, that is our main concern. But I guess, again, my father's made this effort on ugliness rather than health, which is, I think, has detracted from the message. For the past 50 years, he's championed an unorthodox cure based on a theory about the cause and treatment of crooked teeth, which he calls orthotropics. If correct, Mew's theories would upend many of the fundamental beliefs of mainstream orthodontic practice. Spot on. This really does have the capacity to upend what we've been thinking, the whole way we've been thinking about crooked teeth. Traditional orthodontic teaching explains crooked teeth are mostly through genetics. We inherit the alignment of our bite from our parents, just as we inherit many other traits. That's what they believe. Mew does not believe this. No, it's untrue, scientifically proven. In fact, very, very solidly scientifically disproven. He said he's used crooked teeth as a symptom of sweeping, unrecognized health crisis. Spot on. Changes in our lifestyle and environment since the 18th century, Mew contends, are inducing our jaws to grow small and recess. Well, no, it's not since the 18th century. This is since basically in the last 10,000 years. There was a small change in the first epidemiological transition when we went from hunter-gathering to farming, and then we've had another change sort of as we went through that second epidemiological revolution, where we went from subsistence farmers, when 85, 90% of the population were farmers. You ate everything you made everything you ate, and then we went to specialization, where other people made your food. We became discerning consumers of food, and clearly then started sealing our houses, and probably a couple of other things as well as that. And of course, the introduction of sugars and various things, softer foods. Teeth do their best to come in straight, correct, and our misinformed faces cause them to twist and turn and compete for space. Very good, Billy. As a result, we've been robbed not only of our tidy smiles, but also, Mew says, of well-defined faces that were our birthright of the ancient ancestors, and which Mew regards as a mark of true beauty. Yes, can we get away from the beauty angle to the health angle? I know that sells newspapers, beauty, and I know my father is focused on the beauty, and it's very true. However, it is more the health aspect, and I actually would worry that if we were to meet properly grown Paleolithic man now, they may have such a difference in facial form that we might not actually find them that attractive, because they would be so different from what we commonly see. I've thought about this, but difficult to put into words exactly, and I have no great knowledge of what they might look like exactly. Since 1970s, Mew, later joined by his 51-year-old son and fellow orthodontist Mike, that's me, has treated patients in his practice in the London suburbs, correct, using nothing more than platelet expanders, dietary changes, and the force of the tongue, and an appliance the family invented called BioBlock. More or less crew, the Mews claim that they have counteracted the effects of modernity while children are still growing. Where traditional orthodontists focus mostly on the efforts, can focus their efforts on straightened teeth, Mew says his aim to save the face. Very true. We are aiming to save the face. And I guess that beauty health crossover is that I think we're hardwired to be attracted to people's faces that have grown well. It would make sense, Is that's, as I said, often I think your face is the CV of your health. If you've grown well, is that outward sign to other people that you've grown well? Whether that is genetic or environmental, that combination you've achieved should be attractive or worthy of someone partnering with you. Mews have enraged the orthodontic community with their caustic, uncompromising way they've promoted their theories. What's the caustic way? We've really tried to be, nice about it. We've gone overboard to be nice about it. They and the something of non-traditional practitioners who followed them occupy the furthest reaches of the orthodontic fringe, written off for decades as a small but troublesome band of cranks and kooks. Yeah, true. They almost never speak at mainstream conferences. No, we never speak at mainstream conferences. Well, we're not allowed to, because we're blacklisted. It's not supposed to happen in science. But in orthodontics, most of the conferences I see, it's a carefully managed event of the right people speaking, giving the right message. Their papers, if they publish them, tend to appear in obscure fourth-rate journals or profit-driven industry magazines. Yeah, well, if you can't publish in the main magazines because you're blacklisted or people just don't want to hear what you've got to say, that's what happens. British and American orthodontic researchers told me that nearly every claim the Mews have put forth is wrong. Yes, but they don't discuss that, and when they're not going to enter into a debate to whether it's wrong. They say in their opinion it's wrong. So Kevin O'Brien, interesting, a leading academic orthodontist in the UK, yeah, probably one of the highest, described their work to me as mostly discredited. Well, how can you discredit it? I mean, when was it discredited? I'm aware of the write-up of this discreditation. Was we opportunity to respond or to this critique? It's just done quietly. When I mentioned Mew to a prominent American orthodontist, he cut me off. John Mew is an idiot, he said. A total idiot. Well, that's what they say. But, all we're calling for is, what as I said, is the continuation of the scientific process. As I want debate. I'm asking for debate on why teeth are crooked. My father did that before 20 or 30 years ago. Does that make him an idiot? Well, in the eyes of the orthodontist, to a prominent American orthodontist, clearly. So the orthodontic community's frustration, however, the Mews benefits have begun filtering into the public consciousness. Exile from academia. John and Mike have taken to spreading Orthotropics online, particularly on their YouTube channel. In the process, they have become popular amongst incels, the involuntary celibates, the involuntary celibate young men who congregate online and who explain their lack of romantic success through a toxic message of misogynistic ideology. As the incels touted the Mews, elements in the ultra-right joined in. Really? All of them sharing theories about idealized male beauty that closely overlap the Mews' own. That's interesting. In 2018, after years in obscurity, Orthotropics rebranded by incels as Mewing. I don't quite know who did this, but maybe it was the incels. Makes for a good story. Leapt into the mainstream. The subject of discussing on alternative health forums and beauty vlogs. Mike and John's YouTube videos have drawn in millions of views. A substantial percentage of them young women. Yeah, it does surprise me how many young women. I thought it was mainly a men thing, but here we go. In virality, the Mews have lost some control of their idea. Well, it's never my objective to control anything. I think, why do you want to control a science? Why do you want to control the truth? I mean, you want it out there. In fact, I want not to control it. On YouTube, vloggers with hundreds of thousands of followers have promoted Orthotropics, a therapy intended only for young children as a beauty treatment for adults. Well, yeah, the therapy was initially, because I wouldn't say it was intended for young children. It's just difficult to get results in older people. Although watch this space, we're getting that. The Mews have responded not by telling their newfound fans they're wasting their time, but by beginning to treat a select group of adult patients to see what's possible, as Mike told me. Well, kind of twisting this a little bit here, Billy. So I have been treating a group of adults to see what changes I could get. I've got some very unhealthy adults who really need some help, particularly with sleep apnea, who they need help badly, and I'm trying to help them. Sleep apnea, it's very insipid within you. It affects everything. You will die early, or there's a high likelihood you're likely to die early from sleep apnea and its consequences. And these people need help. and I'm seeing what I can achieve, and I'm getting better at it. And in theory, you watch an 80-year-old have a stroke and watch one side of the face fall down. So in theory, you should be able to help these people. Okay, despite the scientifically uncharted nature of this endeavor, neither have much doubt about the likelihood of success. Well, yeah, if I can get the individual to change, we'll get success. And changing someone's structure will help them achieve that, but that's another thing. As John swore the first time he and I spoke, every single treated face with orthotropics will be good looking. Well, if the child does or the adult does what we ask, yep, that's at times a bit of a big ask. Since his youth, John Mew has obsessed over what distinguishes beautiful faces from plain ones. Yes, but again, Dad goes on about beauty more than health too much. He readily volunteers that his own face falls into the latter category, a realization that dawned on him at age 17 when he overheard a girl describing him as the boy with the very long face. This confirmed a thought that had struck him sometime earlier. Walking along a roadside in his hometown in Kent, he tended to hang his mouth open. Maybe the downward pull of his facial muscles had helped narrow and lengthen his jawbones. After dental school in the 1950s, John worked as an assistant to an orthognathic surgeon, Macendo, one of the top guys in the world, who advanced people's jaws to improve their appearance. Yeah. Dad had some really good opportunities. He told me that he would examine specimens in museums where he would use the jaw deficiencies and malocclusion and misaligned bites. So malocclusion is not actually a very well-defined term, but it means crooked teeth or jaws. Were non-existent in archaeological and animal records. Why? You can say archaeological records. Our ancestors didn't have crooked teeth. They had all of their teeth present, including their wisdom teeth, as a general rule, and pretty straight teeth. And none of the other 5,400 species of mammals have had, or most of them still have, any problems. They're generally good. So he began to think about what had given rise to them and how they might best be cured. Very true. He trawled through the literature for forgotten theories on facial growth. And remember, it was a lot harder. Nowadays we think, oh, well, this person was saying this person was saying this. It's so easy to find this information. We forget how difficult it was back then. He obtained access to cadaver skulls, dead people, and analysed them with particular focus on what he sees as the face's most important bone, the maxilla. Well, I would say maxilla and sphenoid, but for the way the face looks, I think the maxilla is the most important bone. We tend to talk about the jaw in a singular. Generally, we imagine in our minds that the lower jaw, the mandible, and it's not hard to so we tend to talk about the jaw on the singular. The image in our minds is the lower jaw, the mandible, and it's not hard to understand why. The mandible is the face's mobile bone, opening and closing whenever we speak. No, you speak, you'll sing. Yeah, it's very true. By contrast, the upper jaw, the maxilla, as a fixed part of the skull that simply holds the upper teeth. But the maxilla is actually a separate bone of its own, with actually two bones. And in our earliest years of life, the maxilla is hardly more connected to the skull than the other facial bones, a fact upon which Mew became fixated, which we should all become more fixated upon. He came to believe that nearly all malocclusions, even the most severe ones, were an illusion. Okay, the main deficiency lay not in the mandible, as the orthodontist attests, but the maxilla. Well, clearly it's a mix of both. So this is quotation. The orthodontists assume that because the mandible looks like it's back, then the maxilla must be in the correct position, Mew told me. But the jaws grow a pair, their relative positions partly determined by the placement of the upper teeth, above the tongue really, not the placement of the upper teeth. Any deficiency in the lower jaw, Mew believes, is a side effect of less obvious deficiency in the upper jaw. I think you get a bit sidetracked here, but in Mew's telling, this is how modern faces begin to degrade. If the maxilla doesn't grow forward or wide enough, the mandible adjuncts backwards and downwards, so the chin recedes and the face appears to lengthen. An underside maxilla will not push the cheekbones to full prominence, true, according to Mew, but fairly obvious. The bags may crop up under the eyes, the cartilage of the nose, lacking support, may hinge down on the nasal bone, making the nose seem large and hooked. Well, we call it that hook Roman nose, but I mentioned it was a hook Roman nose on one of these forums and got shouted down that I was racist. I don't quite why I was racist. Maybe it wasn't a Jewish nose or an Arabic nose. I mean, anyway. You do get some strange people on the internet. In fact, everyone can be strange at times. Overall, Mew says, the face will not only be plain, but in many cases so flat as to look melted. Modern melting faces. That's a video I did some time ago. Okay, then we've got a picture of me. How do I think that picture of me? It's okay. They've gone for the dramatic look, I think. Not very smiley. Mew thought the origins of poor growth could be found in the Industrial Revolution. Well, this is a second epidemiological transition. And this, largely, that's true. The rise of processed foods, beginning with the intervention of caning in the 1980s. What's caning? Look, caning was when you got caned at school for doing something wrong. Anyway, soft diets to the point where the masseter muscles, what about temporalis? Yeah, masticatory muscles, barely had to do any work when chewing. Without the strain of the facial muscles working against the mandible and the maxilla, children's bones no longer grew as thick as they once had. Yeah, well, they don't have as much mass as they once did, and it's changed their orientation. Even more important in Mew's eyes, as people moved into cramped, polluted cities, they developed allergies that stuffed their noses and they needed to breathe through their mouths, which Mew believes distorted their jaws. I mean, this is a small argument. I think, a small argument with my father, I think that this change with the disuse of the muscles is more important than the change in the breathing that's led to the change in tongue posture. You know, if you get a blocked nose, you have to drop your tongue to breathe through your mouth. After your nose clears, you may go back to breathing through your nose. However, frequently your tongue will still rest low. So especially the top jaw collapses a little bit during this phase. So yes, in a way, that's true. But it is a mix. I think the muscle effect is more important than the tongue effect. Dad thinks the tongue effect is more important than the muscle effect. Whatever. Mew felt the cure then must lay with the diet of half foods and with the tongue, which he said should rest on the roof of the mouth, acting as a kind of scaffold for the growing maxilla, more or less. If he could figure out a way to get young patients to toughen up their diets and keep their lips shut while they were growing. Clearly, we've got lips and tongue. They're slightly different things, but I can't make people put their tongues on the roof of the mouth. I can't see if people's tongues are on the roof of the mouth. So making them keep their lips together it's a good start. He thought he could cure malocclusion without braces and put industrialized faces on the right path of growth, more or less. Throughout the 1970s, he tested his theories on his own children. It's me. Which he did. His first son, Bill, did poorly. He suffered from severe allergies and had so much trouble keeping his mouth shut that John resulted to hypnosis, I remember it. And I remember my brother coming home and telling me, look at this spot, count down from 10 down to 1. I think I probably tried focusing on the hypnosis. My brother learnt more than he did, just because I'm a little bit more focused at times. Though Bill disputes this, John says he created a headboard with spikes that poked his son's chin anytime he parted his lips. Okay, Dad tried lots of things, but your dad, is clearly out on the spectrum, my father. And, he'll try something, he'll be, for a few weeks, this is the flavor of the month, and then he moves on. And I'm pretty sure he did try this with Bill. Bill probably doesn't remember. His third child, Rosie, was put through the opposite experiment. Curious about the effects of soft diets on facial growth, John instructed his wife to serve her puree foods in a bottle until she was 4 years old. I had teeth growing one in front of the other, Rosie told me. I was a really, really ugly little kid. Yeah, we don't mince our words in our family, do we? It was the third child, Mike, who became John's orthotropic masterpiece. The success evident as they sat side by side on the edge of the lake at the castle. Where John's face is thin and oblong, Mike's is wide and short. His chewing muscles so large that you can see them flex. Well, I've got good chewing muscles, yeah. Well, how do you get good muscles? Chew. And I've been chewing. In 1981, John published his theory in the British Dental Journal, hoping to spur an orthodontic revolution. Fat chance in retrospect. But the response was frigid. Frigid, cold to freezing. As he recounts in his unpublished memoir, one reviewer simply wrote, "We might as well discuss whether the moon is made of green cheese." Who was that? The guy, Lyle Johnson. Yeah, he actually had a letter that he wrote Dad saying that. I wonder what stimulates someone such as Lyle Johnson to go out of his way to be quite so rude and mean. Why? Well, you won't actually discuss, none of these people, none of these academic orthodontists, I've never had a in-depth discussion on orthodontics with any senior orthodontist ever. They refuse. They're happy to criticize me. They're happy to send letters and say things like this, but they won't actually discuss anything. They won't engage in, the scientific process. Anyway. 5 years later, still indignant over the article's rejection, he detailed his ideas in a self-published book, on the cover of which he printed the gold embossed Italian quotation, "Esper is move," I think. Yeah. And yet it moves. The defiant words of Galileo is said to have spoken following his trial for heresy. Is Dad putting himself up there with Galileo? Well, if Dad is right, this really is big stuff. It's difficult to underestimate. It's difficult for people to understand just the magnitude of these theories and where that leads you to. I mean, that's why to start the scientific process, please, can we make some headway? He then gave up traditional dentistry and committed himself to orthotropics full-time. For the next 30 years, he treated a small but loyal group of patients at an unassuming clinic in the South London suburbs of Purley. Well, actually, he worked in 2 clinics, one in Tunbridge Wells, one in Purley, 2 days a week at each, with Wednesdays for his research and everything else. Only stepping down in 2017 at the age of 89, when the General Dental Council took away his license we're going to come back. I think that was, I think the General Dental Council did the wrong thing. I mean, to put it politically. And I think we're going to revisit that. That will be one of my dreams, to restate the reputation of my father. I think that's what every son should do. John told me that the revocation stems from a deliberate, provocative advertisement he had published, which accused the orthodontic community of perpetrating an illegal scam on patients with their treatments. Kind of actually what he accuses the General Dental Council of allowing the British orthodontics to an illegal scam, I think it is, as he quotes. Anyway, but it was a suggestion. I think I remember discussing with Dad, and I can't remember how much were my ideas, but basically we said, when you're being suppressed, then no one's talking to you. No one's talking to you at all. So how are you going to get it's really an important message out there. So the idea was that if they wouldn't come to us, if we couldn't go to them because they weren't going to listen, we would have to get them to come to us. Because if someone makes an action against you, then at least you have the chance to defend yourself. Well, clearly that didn't go very well because Dad lost his license. And they actually never talked really about the main facts, his concerns. It was, I think, scandalous how he lost his license. But there we go, it's my opinion, and I've got to be careful because for certain reasons, obvious. Okay, but he had been accused of failing to protect a patient's personal information and of malpractice. I think this whole thing needs some airing. A mother alleged, among other things, that she pursued a course of treatment on her daughter after she withdrew consent. Sorry? She alleges that he pursued a treatment on her daughter after she withdrew consent. Sorry? Anyway. John denies this allegation, blaming ineffective legal counsel. They were poor. I'm sorry. Still, ever since, he has been stuck in the castle, feuding about orthotropics on Facebook. Well, this is Dad's care in the community. This is what keeps him engaged and active. He can go on Facebook and he can engage with people. It keeps his mind going, which is really important. You need something. At 90, he's about to be 92, to continue with his level of engagement and intellectual capacity. It's great. It's great to see, actually. I think Facebook helps him. In the 1930s, after an aimless decade partying around Europe and working as a traditional dentist, Mike decided to follow his father's footsteps. I literally took a decade. I didn't. So I qualified in 93. Then I went into dentistry at 2000. I went into orthodontics at 2000. And I realized what an uphill challenge this was going to be. And at one point, I worked part-time so that I could party more and have fun and get that out of me. I think I meet so many people in academia who are, what do we say, a little bit square, a little bit, what do we say? I definitely built some good social skills and charisma, or maybe honed charisma. I don't even build it. And it was important for me to take that time off. It's made me ready, and for this, it's crazy the life I have now, how focused I am. And I think if I hadn't had that then, it would be very hard to mentally validate that. It was a great decade, the best part of a decade. Then I went to train in Denmark at one of the top universities. It's one of the top 5, probably the best university for adult orthodontics in the world. So then I joined John at the Pearly Clinic. if John projects the measure demure of a Victorian naturalist, then Mike comes off as, let's read this, as a product of the internet age. His words pouring out in half sentences and overlapping thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I'm a classic dyslexic. Yep. Anyway, staff members seem flustered by Mike's frenetic energy and his comments of the clinic, and his command of the clinic seems an unequivocal boon for Orthotropics. Okay. Since 2018, under his direction, interest in the clinic has exploded. Well, if it would explode, that was 18 months ago. If he thought it had exploded 18 months ago, I have an issue in my clinic dealing with people sending me emails. I mean, trying to sort out like mails from, but like inquiries. I mean, I had the Observer paper wrote to us. We missed it, but in this avalanche of mails that come in towards us. And so I'm sure I missed some very good mails, but what can you do? Originally, the YouTube channel was just a way to game search engine results. I guess it was really. Someone advised me to put up YouTube videos on subjects, and there's me itching to say what I really want to do. The first videos answered basic dental questions with titles meant to lure in new patients from Google. But eventually Mike grew frustrated, feeling he had failed to speak hard truths to the people who click through. Spot on. Yeah, I was getting frustrated. You know, when you got this truth, this knowledge, or I believe maybe I'm just deluded. I'm crazy or I'm right. There's no middle ground. And either ways, I need to get the information out there, because I'm crazy, then I'm doing it stupidly. If I'm right, then this is very important. In 2020, he started posting the videos he actually wanted to share, sermons on what he considered the true cause of crooked teeth. Yeah, sermons, I don't know if that's the right word. In many of the videos, he wears blue scrubs, like I am now. I'm lending him a clinical authority. Possibly. Even when the words are carefully scripted, he keeps his tone natural to ensure the material is accessible. God, so many people keep telling me how I should or shouldn't be. You know, this advice from people. You watch, I've been every different style, I guess. I've been doing it a while now. He talks about tongue posture, recounts patient success stories, calls out the orthodontic establishment, and teaches viewers to see the countless ways their faces have grown wrong. With the help of a small team, he and John began regularly putting their videos meant to show their viewers the threat to health and beauty they see in traditional practice. I guess, warning that their lives could be ruined by the decision to sit in an orthodontist's chair. Yeah, I more or less true. I mean, clearly I just want debate. I mean, you know, before I went on to YouTube, I spent, this 5 years, trying to overlap slightly, trying to gain a debate within my profession on why teeth were crooked. Well, that seems to me a bit of a no-brainer. You know, we're treating how many percentage of the population? In some areas, 50 or more percentage of the population of the children growing up, our future population with orthodontics. And yet no one, the profession, my speciality, doesn't know the cause. I think we should be highlighting this. So almost all of John's patients came from within England, but Mike's Dad had people from further afield, from Netherlands, Finland, Spain, and the United States. According to Mike, one family from Switzerland flew their children in a private jet twice a month. Well, they didn't always come in the private jet, but they did come twice a month from Switzerland. It comes with a bodyguard sometimes. while a father living off the coast of Estonia travelled by ferry, bus, plane and train to have his daughter treated. This guy's, he's a surgeon. He's a pediatric surgeon coming. He's not in he's not being, he understands what's going on. During my week in the clinic, hundreds of emails flooded in, most of them from YouTube viewers seeking advice on tongue posture. Demand for John's typo-riddled... There you go. Magnus opus, okay, I know what it means, on orthotropics, the cause and cure of malocclusion. Meanwhile, has skyrocketed. Copies sat stacked around the office, awaiting to be sent to practitioners in Taiwan, Germany, and Saudi Arabia. Yeah, we are getting interested. I'm amazed how many patients buy this book and wade through John's, textbook on orthotropics. There would most likely be no interest in orthotropics today were it not for an email Mike received some time ago around the spring of 2012 inviting him to speak about facial growth at an event in London called the 21 Convention. Well, you never know what was the most important thing. What was that? So apparently some guy, English came as one guy, American came as another guy, was an advertising guru who said that, half of your advertising is useless. You just don't know which half. And I think the same thing could be stated here. You don't know which actual video got things going. This video certainly did, but maybe other ones would have if this one hadn't. Who knows? Anyway, I went to speak at the 21 Convention. So, featuring speakers from all corners of the so-called manosphere. Interesting word. Pickup artists, Navy SEALs. I never knew what pickup artists were. Would that have been useful when I was single? I don't know. Maybe this is all sort of twisting things and careful of twisting things because you can lose out. And men's rights activists. Advocates. The organisers had come across Mike's work. I think they came across it from the Ancestral Health Symposium, the first one that was given, in 2011. Mike says he arrived at the lecture without looking into it and was surprised to find the room full of young men desperate his advice on how they could improve their looks. In his talk, Mike compared facial growth to bodybuilding. I said bodybuilders understand the work and effort they need to put in to building their physique. But we don't do the same with our faces, he recalled. He told the young men that through persistent and proper tongue posture, every one of them could become more attractive. At the end, Mike said the attendees mobbed him and he had to be ushered out the room. Well, that's normal. That's kind of a normal what goes on when I finish a lecture. As I said to them, I said, you'd be crazy to try these techniques to gain change because they're very difficult. However, you'd probably be crazy not to try these techniques because, what else are you doing? And the health effects could be massive. So Mike mostly forgot about the event, but in June 2014, a user going by the name of Orthodontist, Mike says it wasn't him. I'm sorry. There's this, people think there's a conspiracy that I went out and put something on this message board called Slut Hate that wasn't me. A central gathering point at the time for incels. At that same year, Elliot Roger, a member of Slut Hate's precursor forum called killed 6 people in California with the stated intention of instigating a war on women. interesting fact. Many self-identified incels have a highly mechanistic understanding of human relationships and believe that they can improve their situation in a sexual hierarchy through a practice called looks maxing, enhancing one's sexual appeal through weightlifting, skin and hair treatments, and even plastic surgery. I mean, basically, it's the idea of you make yourself good looking and you go up the sexual hierarchy. That's actually reasonable psychological evidence to suggest that is actually true, although clearly personality counts. So I guess it's how much money you've got, but the orthodontist recommendations were clear. The Mew's orthotropic techniques could be an important addition to the toolbox. Yeah, but the theory also had a deeper allure, like the movements against vaccines or circumcision or GMO, which I think that's the female one, isn't it? Orthotropics spoke to its newfound adherents and reactionary desires, affirming their skepticism of authority and faceless establishments, promising to restore a stolen masculinity and recounting a simpler but exhilarating narrative that pitted modernity against the best interests of the human race. That's an interesting way of putting it, Billy, actually. I think you're onto something with that. I'm certain. It's interesting being in something and having something observe it from the outside. Fascinating, really. So, unknown to the Mews, users on Slut Tape began talking about trying orthotropics on themselves. Yep. Eventually, their discussions caught Mike's attention. Grateful to have an audience. I guess maybe I was grateful to have an audience. I mean, we were trying clearly to promote what we were doing in the clinic. The time I had I had Kian working for me. He was an interesting character. And of course, he had some Google alerts out on my name. So if my name was used, the Google alert found it. And that's why we found these people talking on Slut Hate. So I ventured on Slut Hate and offered to hold a Q&A for people on Slut Hate. Questions came in from users with names like Beta Gay Face and Insult Executioner, which Mike answered in an awkward YouTube video. Yeah, I did, I was getting a lot of mails as well that they don't cover here. And it was almost easier to respond to the sort of take a topic and respond to it in a video, because then it answered many people's questions rather than me having to answer each individual questions. Back then I didn't get so many emails. When an email came through, I was able to answer it. And I did try to answer many emails. I really tried hard. It's strange. I set into this clearly not to make money. I thought I was going to lose everything. I kind of did lose everything. And I was trying to, I really wanted to make people better. I mean, it seems a little bit strange to many people. Sometimes myself, even now, how maybe naive I was at the time, but there we go, such is life. Before long, support began arriving from ideologically approximate directions. Mike especially appreciated the words of Marcus Folin, a Swedish bodybuilder and something vlogger who calls himself the Golden One. In a popular video, the Golden One explained to his 100,000 subscribers how Mewing could help return vigor and good looks to the modern men. Yes. After the British Orthodontic Society expelled Mike, the Golden One rallied his spreaders to followers to spread Mewing videos in order to combat Mike's orthodontic adversaries, who said he had a vested interest in silencing the Mews. Well, they do have a vested interest in silencing the Mews. Yeah, there's a story. Okay, so then we've got a picture of Nick. Yeah, I mean, it's nice. Nick got a good result, actually, mainly through his hard work and effort. You know, what I've worked out is that the harder the individual works, the better the result, particularly when you get in the teenage years. It's hard to get good results in the teenage years without someone doing a lot of the work themselves, which is essentially what you've got to do. By 2015, inspired by his online followers before and after photos, Mike decided to begin. No, I wasn't inspired by these followers. It had nothing to do with it. Irrelevant, really. Nothing to do with it. I was already trying to help people in an older age group, and I was getting sometimes limited. It depends what results we're looking at. I was helping people improve their breathing. I was helping people get straight teeth. And I was getting some improvement in facial change. You know, I was using facial change, and a bit, it was small, as a sort of barometer of the changes in health I was gaining on people. But it had nothing to do with my online followers before and after photos. I'm not hunting them down. I don't even collect them. During the days I spent with him at his office, a few of these men, all of them in their 20s or early 30s, came through. Most claim ignorance of the incel forums. Well, I'm relatively ignorant of the incel forums, as are, I think, most of my patients. But occasionally their language betrayed familiarity with some of those communities' fixations. Many mentioned, only half in jest, that they'd been red-pilled by the Muse. Well, I think that's quite a common term now. In fact, my associate used it the other day, and she certainly doesn't go to the Izzy's incel forums. I think it's just a term. It really is. It really describes what we're saying. It's the red pill or the blue pill. You know, it's just such a good analogy. I mean, clearly taken from the film The Matrix. Nick, a 29-year-old mechanical engineering doctoral student from Greece, with an oval face framed by slick back hair, bedeviled men split themselves hang around face slick back hair. Believed men split themselves into two camps early in life: muscular, strong-jawed, athletic boys who dominated social life, and studious boys whose late nights in the library leave them with hunched backs and weak jawlines. So he thinks there's these two groups that are formed. You get the impression you're submissive, he told me, which I'm not. And Nick blamed his childhood orthodontics for his predicament. At the age of 13, having teeth pulled and braces put on, he noticed with horror his face was changing. Yeah, I think that's true. I just think many people don't even notice it. He now believes his braces forced him to mouth breathe, narrowing his upper jaw and contributing to his shallow appearance and recessed chin. After seeing the Muse YouTube videos in 2016, he reached out to Mike, who invited him for an evaluation. He said, "Let's see if you have those problems you think you have, or it's just in your mind," Nick recalled. As Mike analysed his face, Nick said, "I was fascinated. He was telling me things about the years. He was telling me things that years earlier I had told my parents." That is such a common finding, that these young individuals notice these things, tell their parents. Their parents are saying, no, this doesn't happen to them. And then when they find me saying this, echoing their views at the time, and it's their face, then, well, I think it's an interesting realization for many people. Nick faulted mainstream orthodontics for just memorizing answers from a book. The Muse, by contrast, offered a radical skepticism of received wisdom an absolute clarity in their explanations. Well, I think that's true. I think the number of times angry orthodontists have come up to me in conferences and tried to gun me down with sort of abusive comments, and I mean abusive comments. They walk up to me full of anger and they say, "You're terrible." I stop them. I'm very polite. I've learned, there's these techniques called cushioning, how to deal with angry people. And then I ask them a few sensible, clear questions with clarity. I start trying to take them down a sensible path. After one or two questions, they sort of realize where this is going. They announce that I'm impossible to talk to, and they walk off in a huff. And I kind of think, well, what goes on there? We do have real clarity in what we're saying. And all we're really asking for is the opportunity to speak, to be heard, to gain scientific engagement on some really, really important topics. I mean, this is the youth this is our youth, the future of humanities. Anyway, there are no hidden meanings or complicated alchemies that people are hiding from us. By the time I met him, he'd been in treatment for almost 2 years. And looking at his progress photos, I saw no differences. Okay, I can see clear differences. When I asked Mike to point out what he saw, he gestured vaguely at Nick's cheeks and said, "It's subtle." I mean, Billy came here very sensibly and very skeptical. I mean, it's important to be skeptical. Billy was truly skeptical. I think I can see changes in Nick's face. It was interesting when Nick went to meet his family, because clearly he's from Greece. He's been doing a postdoc in the UK. His mother recognized him, went to greet him. His mother's a teacher. His father didn't recognize him at all, assumed that his mother had gone up to hug some former student, and clearly waiting, looking around for Nick, and pulling his wife, saying, "Look, stop talking to this student, we're waiting for Nick," before he realized actually this was Nick. And you've not got huge changes on Nick's face. I'm getting better. I've got some much better cases now. It was 18 months ago when Billy came here. But I don't want to be judged just by making people look pretty. I'm trying to make people healthy. Anyway, whether you can see changes on Nick's face is your, have a look. After Nick left, Mike and I crossed the road for lunch at the pub. Without looking at the menu, Mike said he already knew what he was getting, the creamy risotto. I wondered if I should order a chewy dish, but realized probably no point. As Michael explained, his massive jaws were a product of childhood chewing. Were they? I don't know. I don't think I've said that. It's a cumulative effect. Anyone can get big jaws, and I've seen people achieve this over a relatively short space of time. Hard foods couldn't do much for the jaws of a grown adult. I disagree. I settled on shepherd's pie. When our meals came, each was a porridge like a mush, which I noticed we both reached for our spoons instead of our... But no, I normally use a fork, not a spoon, but there we go, Billy. As we ate, Michael launched into a rhapsody about the stardom Orthotropics was bringing him. He was headed for California soon and hoped to have an audience with Joe Rogan. Well, he worried that some orthodontists in America were trying to supplant him. He marveled at the bizarre fever of his fans. Yes, it is. It's interesting when you start hitting on a rich vein. I'm amazed how many people sort of sideways slant to try and gain some of the limelight that you've discovered. I don't know, but it's interesting. We didn't go on Joe Rogan. A lot of people have talked about what I'm doing on Joe Rogan. And it is a bit bizarre, this fervour from my fans. The praise streaming in from around the world had given him the confidence to speak openly about long-held ambitions. He saw himself as the heir to the great scientific inventors of the past, none of whom he held in greater esteem than Charles Darwin. Well, not really, to be honest. I mean, I don't actually think Charles Darwin came out with those theories. It was his grandfather came out with those ideas. And then, he says, when I went to pay the bill, he handed me a £2 coin he'd been keeping in his wallet. Turning it over, I saw the portrait on the back depicting Darwin in profile, staring into the eyes of a chimpanzee. Mike took it back, putting it away, saying reverently that he couldn't bring himself to spend it. Well, sorry, I only held it for a couple of weeks and then I spent it. Interesting story, but how do I put myself on the same level as Charles Darwin? I mean, not really. I mean, it's really difficult to balance ego with self-confidence. I wouldn't have achieved what I've achieved without a lot of self-confidence. You've really got to put yourself out there. And yet I realize ego is the destroyer of science. If I allow my ego to get too big, that is what will destroy me. That is my biggest fear. And putting myself on the same level of Charles Darwin is letting my ego get out of hand. Now, that's silly to try and do that. Okay. All right. We continue. When I spoke to traditional orthodontists about the Mew's claims, they were universally annoyed that these ideas were catching on with the public. Some were scandalized that John, who is not an academic, signs his correspondence with the title professor, an honorific he has claimed since holding a 2-year visiting professorship at a university in Romania. He has also identified himself as the clinical director of the London School of Facial Orthotropics. The school's campus comprises a bare conference room on the 2nd floor of the clinic. Got to start somewhere. The orthodontists stress that no one has ever conducted a credible study of orthotropics, but they haven't done one of orthodontics either. Great. I mean, and so all of the Mew's claims for its efficacies were unproven. Well, we're not. What claims? What claims are we making? We're not making claims beyond what we can. I mean, this is how the establishment puts you down. They pointed to studies that they said showed that treating young patients does not lead to better outcomes. Okay, they can point to studies of totally different treatment methods that I think are useless, that are indeed useless. So what have they proven? They've not tried our methods. They laughed at John's obsession with the tongue and the maxilla. Okay, well, why don't you discuss it with us and have a scientific engagement rather than laughing? That seems like the best course of events for treating the patients and holding that responsibility for the office you hold and what you do. But they also admitted cautiously that the field hadn't properly answered important questions, leaving space for the Mew's contrarian theories to gain purchase among young people who found traditional treatments unsatisfying. There's a compliment there somewhere, I think. In the early days of orthodontics, debate ranged over what the focus of the field should be. I mean, when you look into orthodontics, it's amazing how little hard facts there really are, or the defining what orthodontics is, what malocclusion is, the definitions, even the orthodontic diagnosis is a little bit woolly and descriptive rather than related to causes as a diagnostic should be. Anyway, some practitioners simply aim to straighten the teeth. Yeah. while others argued that orthodontists should look beyond the mouth and try to shape the face as a whole. In 1900, Edward Angle, the father of modern orthodontics, drew a connection between malocclusion and good looks. See, John Mew was not the first. One of the evil effects of malocclusion is the marring of distorting of the normal facial lines, he wrote, in describing the vacant look and undeveloped nose and adjacent region of the face. He saw in many patients exactly what we're saying. The tongue and cheeks, Angle hypothesized, played a powerful part in achieving orthodontic balance. But other orthodontists saw it differently, believing that the most they could do was extract teeth and then straighten the smile. The debate largely ended in the 1930s when clinicians began inventing the first cheap, reliable braces, methods of aligning the teeth that were so effective that they induced a kind of awe in British and American practitioners, and mostly sidelined the proponents of facial growth orthodontics. I wouldn't say it was the 1930s. I was probably in the 1980s when I think it was Andrews did this. They started making brackets that weren't all the same. So when initially you had all the brackets on teeth, but they were identical. They were the same, each one of them. So you had to very carefully bend the wire going through the brackets. And then someone said, well, hang around. Why don't we make each bracket different shapes for the average tooth shape and size? So that means you could just put all the brackets on the teeth, then put a straight bit of wire through. So this technique was called straight wire. And then you'd more or less get straight teeth. And there would be no bending at all. You would just you could start putting things on, turning the handle, shoving straight wire into teeth, and make a really good business out of that. And I think that's when it really changed. And I think that was sort of the 80s when that started going. In the rush to fix people's smiles, however, troublesome facts about straightening teeth were minimized or ignored. Most significant orthodontia's resounding rate of relapse. Yeah, I mean, it's resounding. From the early 1960s to the early 2000s, researchers at the University of Washington recollected more than 800 patients who had their teeth straightened to see how they'd fared. Not well. Orthodontists had long assumed that patients' teeth shifted slightly, but then stabilized when the braces came off. But the University of Washington researchers were shocked to find fully 2/3 of patients' teeth went crooked again after treatment. Yeah, I mean, it depends what the child does. I think clearly there's a great change around puberty when people improve their oral and body posture. People stand up straight, keep their lips closed, because they realize that they become self-aware to their peers, and that it gains change. When I asked Robert Little, the co-author on those studies, why so many people relapsed, he said orthodontists didn't fully know. All we know is that it's happening. In the Mew's eyes, the failure to identify the cause of relapse proves that orthodontists fundamentally do not understand the nature of malocclusion. True. Unsurprisingly, the orthodontists I spoke to defended their profession against the Mew's claims. But a few experts granted that the Mew's might be getting certain things right. Manny, I can't pronounce the surname, a lecturer at the Harvard School of Dentistry and Medicine, and an advocate of scientifically backed orthodontics, notes that the issues like random relapse rightly sapped credibility from mainstream clinicians. While he thought the Mew's views were oversimplified, he credited them and their followers with something he considered valuable, calling attention to the role of the lips, tongues, and cheeks in shaping facial bones, which he says goes understudied. True. Timothy G. Bromage, an expert in biology of human facial development at NYU College of Dentistry, told me that, in his experience, most orthodontist education in the science of jaw growth is woefully incomplete. During growth, the lower jaw follows the upper jaw, Bromage said. So, Mew's focus on the maxilla makes sense. Yes, it's another person's opinion. When the Mews point to the high relapse rates and certain other orthodontic shortcomings, like the way braces can damage dental roots, they are on solid ground. But they're also quick to step into a much shakier territory, particularly in their beliefs about beauty standards. Both Mike and John have spoken extensively on their theories about facial angles and symmetry they consider most aesthetically pleasing. They do not believe all humans have an inborn preference. Hang around. They do not believe beauty is culturally determined, instead proposing that all humans have an inborn preference for wide, forward-growing faces. Yes and no, but there is a definite tendency, and it's well backed by research, I believe. A few years ago, John Mew hired an artist to render an image of an ancient person with his vision of ideal facial growth. The result was a strange Nordic Amazonian woman with a squat face and high cheekbones, who bore an uncanny resemblance to Melania Trump. I think it's a bit weird, that photograph, that picture that Dad had, to be honest. In John's view, nearly everyone living in ancestral societies deviates. Hang around. No. In John's view, nearly everyone living in industrial societies deviates from this appearance, and deformity has become so rare as to seem normal. Very true. Beautiful people in industrialized societies today are, to Mew's, freakish exceptions. So we think it's freakish exceptions to have very nice faces. The lucky few who miraculously manage to eat a hard diet and close their mouths as children. Well, I think that's a gross oversimplification. People who maintain good oral and body posture and function tend to have good facial form and good physical form. Think about all those guys walking out the Serengeti, the Amazon rainforest, or the Brazilian outback, standing up beautifully straight, beautiful physiques, beautiful facial form, all 32 teeth straight, in alignment, never seen an orthodontist, never wear retainers. Okay, next paragraph. Over the past several years, the Mews have begun posting videos that emphasize a new claim, which they believe is among the most serious medical discoveries in history. What's this? Forward facial growth, they say, can increase the size of the upper airway, preventing sleep apnea and its deadly secondary afflictions. Well, I thought I didn't think that was particularly new, and I think it was fairly well covered. John says that in recognition of his insights, many of his followers are trying to nominate him for a Nobel Prize in Medicine. Well, I think a lot of Nobel Prizes have been awarded for a lot less. Anyway, to draw attention to these ideas, Mike told me that one day at the clinic, they had devised a new strategy for their YouTube channel. The video had got the most views, he said, tended to be the ones with a focus on celebrity. The analysation of Kyle Jenner's face, titled How to Improve Cheekbones, had brought in 500,000 viewers alone, and views on Jude Law, Julia Roberts and Catherine Zeta-Jones gained attention as well. Some striking and almost lurid tone. I might have destroyed a girl's face, one announces. Mike admitted that the new direction was an effort to bring, what? An effort to bring women into the channel. And the hope of, I think, Billy, I'm sorry. I mean, for starters, I'm pretty damn certain that Carl Jenner the Carl Jenner video we did went out way after you'd been here. And of course, I've got the British Orthodontic Society I did one with, I've certainly not done one on Julia. I don't think I've done one on Julia Roberts. Did Dad one? Anyway. I did do a couple on some celebrities it was the Facebook guy, and one on that singer. Anyway, I did two, and I've taken them down because the British Orthodontic Society complained to the General Dental Council about those videos, elements of those videos, and also that I was offering unsolicited advice. And so I've taken those videos down. Those cases are still awaiting trial. Crumbs. And Billy, I think you've got that a little bit wrong, but never mind. Mike claims the new use the clickbait to get people in, and then they go down the rabbit hole. Well, that yes, that's what we've done a long time ago, and you're slightly taking me out of context here. I mean, everyone clickbaits. I mean, for example, the title of this article is chosen by the editor, as Billy said to me, to draw people, to get people to click. Well, that's clickbait. What is and isn't clickbait? You want people to read your article, Billy, don't you? And that's what the editor wants, doesn't he? So he writes a title that is clickbait. That's clickbait. Anyway, let's move on. Even during my week at the clinic, the strategy seemed to be paying off. Early one morning, a slim woman wearing a massive shawl named Eva arrived at the clinic waiting room with her 7-year-old daughter, Greta, in tow. She had read about the Mew's theories online, and now she worried that Greta may be suffering from poor facial growth, as well as posture and breathing issues. Balance on his heels, Mike ushered them into the exam room and began analysing the child. He had a piece of string in front of her face, searching for asymmetries. Well, I hold a piece of, it's actually floss. We hold it up, look at the face. And it's a great way to check for asymmetries, sensibly. Searching for asymmetries. He looked up her nostrils, asked her to open her mouth. Mild crowding, he said. She's got a bit of an overjet, meaning her upper incisors stick out, or in all relative terms, is everything else back, bar the upper incisors. It's relative. She has a nice facial form, he concluded, but keep an eye out for her lips. They're cute now and They are cute and pouty now, but if they grew thin, he said, it could indicate growth gone awry. Well, looking at any part of the soft tissue could indicate that. Sitting on a bench nearby, Eva asked why so many people had crooked teeth. As a Mew's claim, a long, unattractive face. And as a Mew's claim, a long, unattractive face. Do you think it is to do with the fact that babies are given pureed food? She worked as a breastfeeding consultant, she said, and knew the importance of a holistic approach to child rearing. She added she'd chosen not to vaccinate her daughter. Clearly, I get a lot of, anti-vaxxers bringing their children to see me. It's as I would. She believing that vaccine skeptical scientists had been silenced by a fearful establishment without a fair assessment of their claims. Separately and unprompted, John once offered me a defense of the scientist who first popularized the anti-vaccine theory, saying he'd been defamed simply for questioning the consensus. He's a chap one should sympathize with rather than castigating, he said. Now, on the vaccination, I don't have a response. I don't think I'm qualified to have a good response, but I do fear that this guy has been, he's been castigated. The guy has been, and I'd love to know more about it. I'd love to hear him. I'd love to see that guy on a level playing field, discussing his theories with his objection, the people against him. Mike then showed either their proprietary device, the BioBlock. It looked like a blue retainer, but on the sides it had 2 fangs, which induced a Pavlovian response. He said that by scraping patients' gums, if they hang the mouths open, it looked quite right. In fact, I did go through that with the fact checker of the New York Times. I said it's not quite how it works, but never mind. Iveta turned the device over in her hands, frowning. Mike told her to seek the opinion of 2 traditional orthodontists, though it was unlikely they would treat a girl so young. By the time an orthodontist was comfortable putting braces on Greta, it would be too late. Most of Greta's facial growth would be complete. These things rarely self-correct, he warned. Yeah, but they sometimes do self-correct. Iveta took her daughter, promising to come back, but Mike has his doubts. I got the impression that she's not going to push her daughter because her daughter is a little darling. He told me. People thought he could magically fix their jaws and said, I'm no more than a personal trainer. I often call myself no more than a glorified personal trainer. Because that's because I've got the qualifications. They have to be motivated to achieve health and beauty for themselves. They have to be motivated to get good growth. I mean, it's constant with this thing about being drawn into the beauty side of it. Yes, I mean, there's a fine line between them. But the BioBlock device has a data collecting heat sensor that lets him see on a computer chart how many hours his patients spend wearing it, which interestingly doesn't emit electromagnetic radiation, as the big concern of many people coming to see me. The emphasis on compliance irks the Mew's critics almost more than anything else, because it allows them to blame patients for their failures while taking credit for all successes. Yeah, that's a difficult circle to square, isn't it? Or square to circle. John has treated dozens, if not hundreds of people, and frequently claims he obtained permission to share their photos publicly. Nevertheless, he has only ever received a small, self-selected sample of photos. He has only revealed, well, I don't think that's necessarily true, actually. No, it's not true. Okay. Best of these before and after pictures on display in the clinic's waiting room were undeniably impressive, but I wondered how many missing photos would show. Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? That's the whole point. You know, that's why we're trying to stay open to research. We don't get good results all the time. We are getting, I tell you, even in the 18 months since Billy's here, our results have become very impressive. And I could have stacked the cards. I could have made sure that the only patients coming in while Billy was here were selected patients, and I didn't. It was just like random. I make a big point of doing that. We've got the records. I've really taken good quality records. You know, there's universities out. You know, there was a university, one of the biggest universities the biggest university in the UK is literally a 20-minute train journey up towards London, right from here. You know, you get on the train, 2 minutes walk from here, you get off the train, 2 minutes walk from the university. It's a main line. And they've got students who need to do masters. There are so many students who need to use masters every year. These are groups of full-time investigators paid for by the public purse from our taxes, my patients' taxes as well. And they need to find research projects. Why don't they come down and have a look at our results? I've really tried to take meticulous records. Why don't they come down and look at these records and just compare them to the results they're getting? You know, that's the scientific process. That's one of our only desires, you know, a debate on etiology, you know, a wide-ranging discussion on any core topic, you know, some comparative research. That's what we're asking for. You know, here's Billy saying, I wonder what the many missing photos, but no missing photos would show. I mean, you got to see it, Billy, warts and all. It was there in front of you. There's nothing missing. It's there. That's all we're asking for is research. Anyway, in the basement of the castle one day, I came across 6 plastic bins inside with all of John's patients' photos. He seemed surprised that they'd turned up. And when I asked to go through them, he refused. Really? It's not like Dad. What would be the point, he said. If someone doesn't look good, I'll just say they didn't comply. And if they do look good, I'll just say they did. Did Dad say that? Anyway. I think that could be taken out of context, but anyway. In The Cause and Cure of Malocclusion, John writes that he lives by his personal principle. Never try to make a statement that may one day be proved wrong. At first, I'd taken this as a commitment to his judiciousness of thought. But as I considered these 6 boxes, the emphasis shifted to the end of the sentence, be proved wrong. And I started to understand why a man who spent the vast majority of his life promoting an untested theory might be skittish. What do you mean skittish? Sorry, I've got to come down, have the boxes. You know, I'm sorry, I don't know what an offhanded comment of Dad has said. Anyway, boxes are there, Billy, anytime you can go through them. Anyone can come through them. I think it represents what my father did in the past. My last day with the Mews, I returned to the castle by train. One of Mike's assistants retrieved me at the station, and we drove alongside rolling sun-drenched fields and the historic village of Mayfield. We passed a small, cartoonishly slanted Tudor cottage whose facade it turned out had been restored by John Mew just a few years before. The sunken clay roads took us deeper into the countryside, where we turned a corner and came upon a crooked castle in its hollow. Let's see, you've talked about the castle twice now. John made us tea and we sat on the edge of the lake. We recounted a half-century's worth of feuds and sporting feasts of his youth, his homemade catapults and jousting tournaments, as the German bombers he had watched from his bedroom window as a boy. A plump pheasant perched on the wooden fence uphill, interrupted occasionally with a screech. Around a young redwood, which the Mews lament would one day cast the castle in shadow, a dozen peculiar shaggy brown sheep grazed in the grass. They're called Sawyer sheep, John said. The Romans developed the woolly sheep that we have now, and they're a very artificial type of sheep. But the Sawyer sheep are very much the same as they would have been in pre-Roman times. Maybe it was later than the Romans that they did that, but never mind. John was in combative mood. Oh, hell, what's he going to say now? He said he wanted to consult with his assistant on ways to sue the General Dental Council to have his license reinstated. Well, to be honest, Dad, you should. My opinion, it was a scandal that you lost your license. The fact you're in your 90s now, I don't know if you're going to be treating patients ever again. However, they should restore your license for the sake of it. Yeah. I really think we need, for the good of the public and the future of orthotropics, to nail them somehow. Good choice of words, Dad. He said it was clear that he couldn't bear not to be practicing. Yes, I know he can't bear not to be practicing. I know, yes. Dad, I know this. To be stuck fecklessly in the castle posting on Facebook. I am trying to engage you as much as possible, Dad, but you are not the easiest to work with sometimes. Iconoclasm, he said, always brought with it ostracism. Revolutionary ideas took time to catch on, particularly in medicine. I think that's true. He knew he would die without seeing his theories widely accepted. Dad, I have tried so hard. I don't think there's much more a son can do to try harder to get your ideas recognized before you are A, either dead, or B, you've lost your marbles, so you can't gain the benefits of you realizing this. But there was a historic figure whose story gave him some hope that one day vindication would come. In a poem written in the 1700s, shortly before his death, the physician Erasmus Darwin proposed that creatures might, over time, change their appearance to adapt to the world, giving rise to new species. Everyone thinks it was Charles Darwin who came up with this idea of evolution, John said, but it was actually his grandfather who came up with the idea. It took the elder Darwin to dream up the theory, but the younger Darwin to push it through. Dad, I do hope you get some of the glory. I do hope you, within your life, while you're with it, you get some recognition. I think you deserve it. For everything you've done and for the hardships you've endured. Few have been as gentlemanly as you've been in light of what you've suffered. Okay, leaving the castle that evening in the waning springtime light, I already knew how I felt about some of the Mew's claims. John's assured belief, for instance, that unattractive criminals are less likely to reoffend if their faces are made more beautiful. But in the weeks that followed, I experienced a shift, an overwhelming change in vision. The kind the Mew's patients and viewers described undergoing. Suddenly all around me, people with tiny jaws appeared, their chins merging with their necks, their lips hanging open and unconsciously as they read a book in a cafe or stared out the windows in the bars. Long faces, tired eyes, crooked smiles. It began to feel as if the Mews might be right on the single but essential point of nothing else. Well, oh God, we've got something right, Billy. Glad to hear. Where am I? Reading. Don't I hate it? Orthodontists' unwillingness to engage with this claim that industrial life was shifting our teeth and reshaping our jaws showed, at the very least, a confounding lack of curiosity about the causes of the problem they were looking at. Well, they're treating, they're putting people through surgery, for crumb's sake. They're taking teeth out, and possibly a lot more. If the Mews were right, then the implications are sweeping. Orthodontists have made billions treating patients for a problem that could have been prevented all along. Please go to the website Prevent Crooked Teeth. Just go and have a look. This is what we're trying to say. I wasn't sure if I trusted my eyes or not. I wanted a second opinion. Visiting museums had been crucial in convincing John that something was wrong with our jaws, so I decided to make a visit of my own. On a Friday in August, I met with an anthropologist named Janet Monge in the ground floor classroom at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. Monge is a warm and voluble person with a mange of grey-white hair and an easing smile. Since the early 1900s, she has been the keeper of one of the world's largest and most geographically diverse collections of ancient skulls housed at the Museum of Pennsylvania. The specimens originally been gathered by physician Samuel Morton in the 19th century. Monge noted that Morton collected the skulls for racist purposes, measuring the projections of his specimen's jaws in an attempt to assess their level of civilizational enlightenment. The same large, forward-grown jaws that the Muse prized as a sign of health and beauty, Morton disdained as markers of inherent cultural and biological inferiority. So basically saying the more downswung the face was, the more civilized and advanced someone was, which in a way is exactly what we're saying, but kind of Morton is saying that the more unhealthy you are, the more civilized you are, but claiming that's a sign of genetic superiority. Clearly going back to genetic argument. Anyway, the Morton specimens sat in cases The Morton specimens sat in cases all around, peering out at us with enormous empty sockets and gleaming teeth. In a plastic container, the Monge had placed skulls from the Middle East, West Africa, Eastern Europe and beyond. When I asked her if she'd ever seen an ancient specimen with crooked teeth, she didn't hesitate. No, not one, ever. Most of the skulls in the Penn collection date from a 40,000 year period, starting in the Stone Age and ending around 300 years ago. Yet they all have an edge-to-edge bite, robust jaws and perfect occlusion, Monge said. But then the specimens from the people who lived 2 centuries ago or less, Monge noted, in a striking change. The edge-to-edge bite completely disappears and the malocclusion suddenly runs rampant. She pointed to a skull on a nearby shelf, that of a woman who lived in the 19th century North America. Unlike the ancient skulls, this pre-industrialized woman's maxilla was crinkled and small, the teeth that sat cramped together. I've always told my students, something happened 200 years ago and nobody has an edge-to-edge bite anymore. I have no freaking idea why, Montage said. She took the skull of a pre-industrialized Siberian man out of her container and clicked the mandible into place. The bone was thick. The teeth met so neatly that they appeared pulled from an Invisalign ad. Monge added, her open mouth revealing a pair of missing molars. She cradled the skull in her hand. Isn't that just perfect? Okay, well, I mean, this article in the New York Times is a step in the right direction. It's starting to add much needed light, shining much needed light on this area. I don't think that we're really going to understand this area till we have the proper spotlight of modern medical research focused onto this. I can't do this all myself. My results, I believe, are outstanding. I believe that we're gaining the best changes, positive changes, that's an interesting point, in facial form ever achieved by anyone on this planet at any time. Now, that's a big statement to make, and I would like someone to prove me wrong. As I said, I believe we've gained really good records that people should come and investigate, research. And I would love, as we've been asking for 20, 30 years, some comparative research. You know, I call this the 10cc club, 10 consecutive cases, 20 consecutive cases. You know, if you're an orthodontist, any orthodontist, doing any technique, take the next 10 patients, we can select which ones, you know, I'm happy to select which one. Select those 10 patients, and then we'll treat them in parallel, comparing results. why can't you do this? Why every time that either my or my father suggests this, every orthodontist says, no, we couldn't do that, confidentiality, it would be irrelevant, it's a silly idea, it may not be the most perfect bit of research, but we could do it right away. We could do that today. And I really think it would teach us so much. We would need the faces because, what we're saying, it's related to facial form. And that's the one thing no orthodontist will ever show me the facial outcomes of their cases. And I have worked as an orthodontist, and I know that sometimes it's not pretty. And I have great concerns. And my real concern, and this is my real big concern, that sometimes orthodontic therapy can be retractive. That means it can actually stimulate in some way the facial complex to downswing. And that may contribute to sleep apnea and other health problems. And we need to really look at that in a very unbiased way. I know that the American Association of Orthodontics ran this conference on Marco Island and then published a white paper. Why couldn't you have included, us or someone like Bill Hang or many of the other people in your discussion? Why were we excluded from any engagement? It's like you've pre-selected the people you're going to allow to discuss or contribute. Yes, you did allow the late Christian Guilleminault to engage in this. I mean, he's not actually an orthodontist. He's not very aware of, he's not familiar enough with orthodontics to really point out the important points. Well, he wasn't. All we want is debate and engagement. And I've started, so I've been asking for debate on why teeth are crooked. Because if you don't know why, currently, orthodontics has achieved many great, orthodontics has done a lot of research, but we still don't know, our profession, the speciality, still doesn't know why teeth are crooked, what the epidemiological, where did it start, with which groups, how did it spread, no even discussion on epidemiology. The pathology, well, we know there's a strong environmental influence. How does that work? And lots of things about treatments. In fact, there's too many treatments. It worries me how many treatments there are. And then the cure. Well, the cure is stopping teeth relapse. And there is no cure. Permanent retention is not a cure. We just need debate. As I said, you've got so much we've achieved. The technology that's allowing me to do this now has been achieved by the application of the scientific process. Can we not really use the scientific process? All I'm asking for is engagement in the scientific process. Billy, it's an interesting article. Thank you. It lends weight. Clearly, you've taken this slightly clickbait angle on it. However, we need engagement within our profession. That's what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I am saying that I'm asking the right questions. And it's only through the scientific process that we're really going to find answers, and we're going to find the best way to treat people. And if we can try prevention, why not? Because I'm worried that the action or inaction of modern orthodontics is affecting the health of generations of the population of this planet. Just my concerns should warrant proper engagement. Why not? What have we got to lose? Please just engage with us. If you're watching this, please do support that. We've got a campaign on Prevent Crooked Teeth. Go to that campaign. That would be a good start. We've got videos on our YouTube channel. We're trying to help people. We're trying to bring about engagement. And I just hope we can get some headway before my father either dies or loses his marbles. Here's to it.